Greetings, everyone. Anthony Marsh on Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film with a new edition of the Terra podcast with Terra podcast episode 321, presented by my Morphin Megaverse Power Rangers Facebook group. Haven't joined? Check it out now. 2021 is Power Rangers Time Force's 20th anniversary. You know, I've been really busy all 2021, forgetting this year is the big anniversary of one of the best seasons of Saban's original run of Power Ranger seasons up until this point. Although I still want to consider Wild Force, part of the original Saban era because it was filmed technically like one, but with the exceptions of the fact Haim Saban and Shuki Levy was not involved with Wild Force's production. More rather, the only people involved with Wild Force from Saban's crew was Jonathan Zacher and Koichi Sakamoto, with a bunch of new people that I had no idea who was running the show at the time, following the transition between Saban and Saban Entertainment and Disney when it came to Power Rangers around this time. So, Time Force was technically Power Rangers' last real fully produced season by Saban, until 10 years later with Power Ranger Samurai, which is inevitably 10 years later today. But Time Force, in my opinion, will still be a better season than Samurai was, because even when Time Force turned 10 years old a decade ago when Samurai was going on, it just made me wonder, where have we gone with these Saban seasons, with Saban's seasons with the old Saban versus new Saban? And I also wanted to talk about, Time Force, and I was just thinking about the season because, compared to 2 years ago when we had Power Rangers Lost Galaxy's 20th anniversary, and I know I apologize for not putting out a re-edit of that 20th anniversary retrospective because of some copyright issues regarding video clips. That's why I had not re-uploaded that video sometime 2 years ago before the 2010 decade ended and we entered this decade of the 2020s. And yeah, 2001 was a long time ago when we had these Power Rangers, but though it was still back in a time when we didn't had YouTube and where we all are right now in the fandom yet. And reflecting on a season of Power Rangers that was in fact one of the best and well-written, well-acted seasons for its time thus far in Power Rangers, well, save for Dino Thunder and RPM seasons like that, but we'll get to them. But when it came to Time Force, I really thought of that season as like, is this season trying to surpass In Space and Lost Galaxy in terms of mature storytelling and well thought, shot stuff, and also the acting and fight scenes and in terms of story? Because, I really, for 20 years, had been a bit passive aggressive with Time Force, and knowing it is one of the best seasons we had of the franchise once again. But growing up, I wasn't really fond of the season. Maybe it's because coming off from a season that was a mixed bag like Lightspeed Rescue, but don't get me wrong, not that I don't like Lightspeed Rescue, but Lightspeed Rescue had its moments. It's still a good season, even though I'd rather take Lightspeed Rescue over the entire Neo Saban era, but once again, I'm still harping on that again, given to the fact that I should have changed my era of ways at this point. And realizing that, Time Force was going to be this special case of a season. Given that you had two major big name actors, seasoned actors to play the fathers of our Red Ranger and female villain, who came from very strong seasoned acting backgrounds, that pretty much also is one of the benefactors that made Time Force such a great Power Ranger series. I don't know how on earth did Saban even got Vernon Wells to do Rancic, but knowing that I've seen Vernon Wells in some movies where he played villains all the time, long before Power Rangers, especially my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where he played Bennett in Commando. And then of course he was also in Mad Max, The Road Warrior, so it made sense. As for the actor who played Wes's father, what's his name? Because I know his face all the time, and I know he has long been deceased. But I know his face because he was always, I mean, no, and he himself, Edward, I think if I'm getting this right, Edward Albert, something like that. Yeah, the same guy who played, the guy who played Wes's father, who, by the way, has done some stuff with Saban before, particularly him doing the voice of Daredevil in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. And they really thought Saban actually was going very smooth with some of the casting choices for those characters. Plus, I actually think Time Force did had a great set of Rangers. Well, save for one, I'll get to later. We also had some of the best looking Megazords given their futuristic aesthetics. I did like some of the weapons and vehicles that they had, especially the Vector Cycles, the Stratocycle, the Battle Warrior Battleizer. And there have been plenty of episodes of Time Force I can recount that were actually pretty good. Well, save for 2 or 3 episodes. And nevertheless, that season, I can tell that it was a very special season. But growing up, though, 20 years ago, long before I was ever on YouTube and in the Power Rangers fandom, when I was growing up, I wasn't really fond of Time Force. I did like some things it had, but I was just not a big fan of it at first, especially in a period when the show was still airing the show episodes initially before we had the turning point of our country, of the US of A, with 9/11. But I say ever since 9/11, when I was still that 8 going on 9-year-old kid when Time Force aired in 2001, and when the year was coming to a close, but by the time of 9/11 and then weeks after it, I opened up on Time Force a little bit. I would say by the time we got to the Lightspeed Rescue team up with Time Force, that being Time for Lightspeed, then I started slowly opening up to Time Force, and then it was like slightly getting good by the end, because earlier on I was just like, I can't get into this, I can't get into it. But by the time I got to its ending with the 3-part End of Time 3-parter, which I'll talk about a little bit in this retrospective, my opinion on Time Force, even when it ended on November the 17th of 2001, my opinion on Time Force, especially with syndicated reruns following the buyout of Power Rangers from Saban to Disney, I started to change my perception of Time Force when I was, back even when I was just only a young 9-year-old kid still watching Power Rangers. But I'll talk about the next time when I discuss what my life would have been if I had not watched any Power Rangers past, Lost Galaxy. Because I promise you guys I would do that video when I get around it. And it's like, as the more I rewatched the season over and over through the reruns on Disney with Jetix and such, and then when Nicktoons did the reruns of old seasons of Power Rangers a decade ago when Samurai and Super Samurai was going on, and even with Megaforce, I opened up on Time Force even more. And then when I started Netflix 5 years ago, when I was subscribed to Netflix, when most of all the Power Rangers were on there, I did, however, stumbled across Time Force again on Netflix and even watched it even more and realized what made it so special. And then now the DVDs. And then all of a sudden, yep, Time Force is a great series. I mean, I gotta realize I've underestimated it. And it's just the problem is my feelings were still toward In Space and Lost Galaxy growing up. And I just felt that a lot of the Power Rangers after Lost Galaxy mainly, Time Force being one of them, of course, I just felt like I just can't get into these seasons. But then when I did watch seasons like this in Lightspeed Rescue and Wild Force and Dino Thunder and Ninja Storm and all those other seasons in between, then I started opening up on these other seasons. But I mean, I will always still cherish Lost Galaxy and In Space and Mighty Morphin and Zeo and Turbo. Yes, Turbo. But I'll discuss that next time when I discuss that particular video. But, Time Force had some of the best, in fact, one of the best well-written stories in Power Rangers. I mean, you had a few, 4 Rangers from the future going after a mutated crime boss and his army of mutants. And then they travel into our world in the year 2001 fictitiously to stop said mutant crime boss from altering the course of history and time and space itself. That's the plot. And personally, I actually enjoyed Ransik as a villain. He is, in fact, one of my favorite villains in Power Rangers, given his backstory and how tragic it is of him being shunned by society because he was different, he was a mutant. And I also like the way how the season, made Ransik, a better villainous father figure for Nadira than, let's say, what I just said a couple of times about Scorpius with him and Trakina in Lost Galaxy again. And I actually think that Ransik, while he still has his hatred for the Power Rangers and human mankind, but although I did like how, as the season progressed, when it came to, again, when they were slowly foreshadowing his hatred for robots, even the episode Frax's Fury fully was the quintessential highlight episode entailing Ransik and Frax's differences of Ransik being a mutant, Frax being a robot, and then Frax wanted his revenge on Ransik because after he had been belittled by him for being a robot. And also I liked how Frax was going to be really the main villain at the end, but Ransik is still the main villain. But it seemed to like once we got to the latter 2/3 of Time Force, then it's like, okay, Frax really, has been doing a lot of this stuff most of the time, but Ransik is still the most wanted criminal by Time Force. And so that's probably why I actually think that both Ransik and Frax were Time Force's only two best villains. Because one of the things I also liked about the season of Power Rangers, as well as with SPD and Dino Thunder, is that we didn't have much, even with Turbo, we didn't have like over 10 or 11 villains to overcrowd the season, and we only have 5 or 6 Power Rangers to focus on a season. Because that's what I like about, seasons of Power Rangers like this, as opposed to, again, seasons like Lost Galaxy or Mighty Morphin or Megaforce, is that 3 or 4 villains in a Power Ranger season is good enough. When you have more than 3 or 4 villains, we can't focus on most of them. And also when you have certain mooks of certain armies, like, if you think back to like Squat and Babu and Finster or Kegler or Porto or even Gluto in the season or Octoroo or whoever, it's like, the villains that actually do all the monster making or whatever, they don't hardly ever do as much. But it's like when you have your main male villain or female villain, they're always, doing more stuff. And I've said before that even what someone that I looked up to and idolized for Power Ranger podcasting about what he made a point back when he stopped making those videos, when it came to villains, humanoid versus monster costume suited static phase villains. It's like when you're a monster themed villain, you don't really have much going on with your character. You're just there just to fight the Rangers with a certain monster of the week on the side. And there you go. And, there's not much you can do with a monster costume suited villain. But when you have a human looking villain, and even in Ransik and Nadira's case, they actually have more to do. Well, again, when I discuss Nadira a little bit later. But I actually think that Ransik was actually one of the most effective human mutant hybrid looking villains we had to date. And although I did like how when we get to, when I discuss post Time Force stuff later in this retrospective, how Ransik and Nadira were like the only villains of the post Zordon era, humanoid wise, outside of Ginger X and Toxica don't count, to actually seek redemption at the end of their character arcs. And I think that's probably why I actually prefer Ransik and Nadira, even though Nadira can be grating at times, in my opinion. But she was still part of the show, and she was still part of the Time Force cast for the villains, later anti-hero side of things. So, but then when it comes to, speaking of Nadira and even with Gluto, I have to agree, like, with some people in the fandom when it comes to our villains of Time Force, that Nadira and Gluto didn't really do as much. They were just waste of space. Nadira especially. But upon my recent rewatches of the season, she actually got to do some stuff in the beginning between the first episode up until Short Circuited, which is episode 7. I would say by the time between the episodes Jen's Revenge through the finale, Nadira just started getting lazier and lazier, and there have been times she does fight the Rangers and stuff in like episodes like Bodyguard in Blue and Last Race. But other than that, she doesn't really do as much beyond, she's just that pink-haired daughter of Rancic who is very spoiled, very selfish, very all about money and jewels and stealing stuff, because like how much does she really need? Like, with her stealing money and jewels and stuff all the time, like, does she already have enough money and jewels that she already stole? Even though, yeah, her and her father and her in the army of the mutants are, criminals, but do you have to keep, stealing a lot of money? You already got enough money in your disposal. What are you going to do with that money? And all that other stuff and all those riches and golds and stuff you stole. But although I would say, I don't even know which episode of Time Force was a highlight for her character. If there's anyone in retrospect, I would have to say the Nadira's Dream Date episode with her and Lucas. Because, and also her relationship with some of the male Rangers. Is she even into Trip? Is she even into Lucas? I can't say for Wes, because even though her and Wes have something in common, but both those characters, our Red Ranger and female villain have fathers that take care of them, and knowing that both Wes and Nadira are both from rich and wealthy backgrounds. But, that's probably one of the things that I have in common to bring up about that with the characters, if you think about the parallels between the two. But although I feel like as though that Nadira and Lucas had some pairing better near the end, and that's probably why I feel like, she works better with Lucas, because even though she had that episode with him, which is probably one of my favorite guilty pleasure episodes of Time Force, and that's probably why I always liked that episode, because it was a good episode, a good and bad episode for Nadira, so I have to give it props with that. As for Gluto, though, I just feel like, looking back on his character, you take the main villain from Time Force's Sentai counterpart, and yeah, while Rancic was more compelling and visually interesting and stuff as a villain, once again another villain made exclusive for Power Rangers. But when you put Gluto, who is basically Dawn from Dawn, what's his name from Time Ranger, you just don't make him do as much, and it sucks that they should have made Gluto do stuff and just being there in the background half of the time. It just makes me wonder what could have been for Gluto. It's like, I don't know, like, he's just there. He's just like wallpaper decoration for the villains. Like, he's just only there just to be there. Plus, that in the Sentai that, their counterpart, that Nadira and Gluto's counterparts had something. So what's wrong? They couldn't let Nadira and Gluto be together. Despite Nadira's discuss around Gluto because of how ugly he looks, and we shouldn't mistreat him because you guys, the villains are, we only have 3 mutants and 1 robot mastermind in the cast of the villains, and it's like, I don't know what they should have done with Gluto. I mean, I guess maybe they should have just ditched him from the somewhere, make him just disappear randomly. Just do that Rita Revolto, Prince Gasket, Archerina treatment. If that villain ain't working well, maybe they should have killed him off or just make him disappear and just focus on the villains we do care about, that being Rancic, Nadira, and Frax. But on upon to the Rangers, though, because again, the Rangers are some of the best we had, but again, I really need to talk about our Blue Ranger, though. Because, to be honest, though, in my opinion, of all of the Rangers from Time Force, Lucas is my absolute least favorite of the bunch. Because it's easy to say, because Lucas, and even upon my multiple rewatches of it in recent years, I've noticed how Lucas was just there. And even with Trip and Katie, but although Trip and Katie had more personality than Lucas did, I mean, I'm not saying Lucas is like the Troy Burrows of Blue Rangers or anything. No, at least Lucas was still a better convincing character than Troy. That's for sure. Or Jaden. But even though I would say Lucas just probably predated some Blue Rangers after him that I hate, like Sky and Kevin, when it comes to being so quiet and reserved. Well, actually, mainly with Kevin, because knowing that Time Force was 10 years before Samurai, but I don't want to compare Lucas with Kevin because, you know, especially as much as I don't like Kevin and Samurai, but Lucas gets nothing going for me because the only thing I just don't like about his character is how he's more about race car driving and being a chick magnet. That's all he is. And it's like, I just can't get into his character. He is one of my least favorite Blue Rangers. That's why no wonder if you saw my top 10 Blue Rangers video, I never decided to put Lucas in my top 10 even for the honorable mentions part of it, if you saw my Blue Rangers top 10 video. And I just feel like there's just nothing about him I liked. I mean, sure, yeah, there were a few episodes dedicated to him, but if there's one that was worth dedicating, well, when you think about the episodes Blue Streak and Last Race, those episodes did parallel with each other. While Blue Streak was early Time Force, Last Streak was midway Time Force, because like Blue Streak was back when the show was starting and the season was starting, and they were acting a bit silly-nilly with Nadira chasing down for money and stuff with the Mantis Mobile mutant, and Lucas had to learn how to, learn how to drive actual 21st century vehicular transportation, because in the year 3000, where him and the other Rangers come from, say for Wes, race car driving is illegal in the 21st century, even in our time back then, because, you can do that stuff in the future, but you can't do that stuff here in our world. I'm sorry. And rules are rules and laws are laws, so you can't really do stuff like that. While I did find that Mr. Pickett's side character, who was his driving instructor in the episode, funny, but then also when you get to Last Race, which was a rather more serious episode, but there were some things about that episode upon my rewatch that I did find funny, especially with Nadira and Dash. But, even with the driving instructor being a black man this time, which made it funny, and him being a drill sergeant of a, driving instructor, I've noticed how they were very funny, but I just wish these episodes could have gave the potential to bring out the humor out of Lucas instead of him being so serious all the time. But actually what makes him so funny to me, even though he's a shitty Blue Ranger, some of the stuff he says and does sound stupid, but that's what makes me laugh at him, not with him. And that's probably why I don't like Lucas. But I still like some of the stupid stuff. I just like laughing at some of the stupid things and some of the stupid stuff he has done, despite him being a cool chick magnet who just only cares about race car driving. That's all. And Nadira's dream date was an even more bigger highlight for his character. Even though I liked how, even when he had to break up with Nadira because he was forced to date her because Rancic's, because it was all a plea of Rancic. If you're dating, see, here's the thing: when you're, if you're a guy, and if you're dating some guy's daughter, you gotta have the father's approval, and you better not, piss off the father of the daughter that you're dating, because he would not be happy. I think I've talked a little bit enough about Lucas, but as for Trip and Katie, though, now at least Trip was the better Ranger of the two, but of course you can't switch. I know it's not possible switching Trip and Lucas's roles around. Like if they made Trip the Blue Ranger and Lucas the Green Ranger, but no, you got to follow what was in Time Ranger. The Green Ranger was the alien, the Blue Ranger was just a blank slate member of the team who's just there. And and also, for those who hadn't seen the Sentai of Time Force in Time Ranger, the Blue Ranger, the reason why Lucas didn't have nothing good going for him, because I think the writers at the time were scared to write that Lucas has something tragic going for him, just like a Sentai counterpart, where if you go back to Time Ranger, the Sentai counterpart of Time Force, the Blue Ranger had a terminal illness. So they decided not to make Lucas have the same, just have him just be this cool chick magnet who drives race cars. Trip, however, he was my favorite of the Time Force, and he is one of my favorite Green Rangers. I just like how gentle and kind, and also very technically precise with making some of the Rangers weapons and stuff alongside, and him and his relationship with the robot Owl Circuit. And I also have to admit, even when I was binge watching Time Force recently, I kind of got to sense some bromances between him and Lucas. Most of the time with him and Wes, because him and Wes had better Red Ranger, Green Ranger chemistry, friendship chemistry, than as opposed with Trip and Lucas. Even though Lucas is taller than Trip, so who am I the judge? And I actually think that Trip had some good episodes, especially the Trip Takes a Stand episode when he had to defend the mutant Nauticon against Eric and Frax, because they all wanted that mutant destroyed, but knowing the fact that's what I liked about that episode, and upon some of the more mature themes of the show with racism and prejudice. I actually think my favorite Trip episode is the Trip Takes a Stand episode when he had to defend Nauticon from Rancic, Frax, and Eric, and how, with that episode. But then you also have Katie, who is one of my favorite Yellow Rangers, because of all of the Yellow Rangers of the post-Zordon era, well, her and Katie are my only two favorites of the post-Zordon, because you know how I feel about Maya and Kelsey when it comes to the Yellow Rangers of this half era within an era. That while I do like Katie, I just wish that they should have did some more with her character besides her being the strength of the team. But I just feel like there could have been something with her that she could have done. Yeah, there was a few episodes dedicated to her, like Legend of the Clock Tower, Future Unknown, the episode with the photographer that was their Peter Parker-esque guest character, Full Exposure. But other than those 3 episodes, if there's one episode I think that I did like about from Katie from the season was Future Unknown. Because, like, Future Unknown, she wanted to, wish that if once the Rangers would capture all of Rancic's mutants ahead of time, she would go back to the year 3000 and meet her family again. But she also had these anxieties of what if the future has been changed and what if they can't come back home because what they're doing in the time stream and in the past, in the year 2001, where we were in the year, realistically, 20 years ago. And yeah, so that was a good episode for her, but sucks that she didn't really have much of an arc. But I feel like the only Rangers in Time Force that had arcs, the ones that actually made Time Force so successful, was Wes, Jen, and yes, our badass Quantum Ranger, Eric. And basically, I think it makes a lot of sense for Wes, Jen, and Eric, leading the show a lot more than Trip, Katie, and Lucas could, because they were just like the backup squad of the team or some stuff. Because Wes and Jen, and particularly with them, because I'm talking more about the core group, because with Wes, and again, he is one of my favorite Red Rangers, and good thing I put him on my top 10 Red Rangers list, because one of the things I liked about Wes, well, I do think that the trend of making Red Rangers have father figure trend kind of overstayed its welcome when we got to seasons like Overdrive and RPM and Samurai and Dino Charge and Ninja Steel, and even with Beast Morphers. But I just feel like Wes was the originator for that. But I just feel like his character arc, what I liked about him is that he didn't want to follow in his father's footsteps. That was one of the best things to come out of his character. And unlike a lot of rich, spoiled brat characters in fiction, what I liked about Wes is that he may be rich and such and all of that, but at least he had a heart of gold and not be greedy and spoiled about it, unlike Nadira on the villain side of things. But Wes, he had a hard time seeing eye to eye with his father. He didn't want to, take over his father's company. But when his father got injured by Rancic, then it was forced by, when Alex, which was Wes's descendant coming back to tell him that he needs to take over Biolab because Destiny, Destiny, the choices that we make and stuff. I'll talk more about that with the themes a little bit with that. And even with his, him having a hard time seeing eye to eye with also Eric, just like with his father. Because, we all know what happens with Wes later at the end with him joining the Silver Guardians for free. Really? With no extra cost neither. And, like, that's what I like. And, Wes had a lot of great episodes in the season, although if there was one episode that I think was a highlight for him, it has to be Worlds Apart, because that was the episode when, the Silver Guardians were introduced. Eric had his introduction in the show. Then you had Wes's secret of him being a Time Force Ranger in front of his father get revealed. And then him running away from his father and joining the other Rangers because he knew what lives are at stake. And he later revealed at the later end of the season that the reason why he is doing this Ranger thing was to help the other Rangers who are from the future to try to capture Rancic and stop him from altering any more, frictions with the time stream and stuff. That's a reason he had to do what he wanted to do. This was his destiny. He didn't want to be some rich, spoiled businessman to follow his father's footsteps and run his company. No. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. And that I liked. I mean, even though we sometimes have to listen to our parents if we have to follow in their footsteps, and sometimes we just do what we want, but it's the choices we all make, and the principalities in some of that, if that makes any sense with that. Plus, his relationship with our Pink Ranger, who is our baddest, tough as nails queen of all Pink Rangers. Sorry, Kim. That relationship, but, as much as I really wanted to see Wes and Jen kiss, but, especially in the finale, even in the episode Love Struck, Rangers almost had those two kiss, but it's like, God damn. Yeah, I mean, they can allow Tommy and Kimberly have a kissing moment, and despite them being in a relationship romantically while also being Rangers, but Wes and Jen couldn't. Even same go when we had Andros and Ashley back in space, which also sucks, And even that forced Tommy and Kat stuff back in Zeo and early Turbo and even the Turbo movie. So what was the point for Wes and Jen to be in a relationship if they're not? I mean, if they are romantically related, but given that Wes is from our time and Jen is from the future, and yeah, I know it's confusing, man. But like, they could have had some. They did flesh out their backs. They did flesh out the romantic feelings for each other. Yeah, but it's just we were so close. Even if you go back to the Love Struck Rangers episode, especially the last scene of that episode, they cock teased them, getting close and kissing. But nope, Odd Job's call, and also doing, leading to the next episode, facing mutants, facing the next mutant of the week. But also, you had, then we gotta go back to, like, Eric, how he and Wes, just like with Wes having problems with his father, Eric just hates Wes's guts. Like, even when he started, now we gotta talk about the Quantum Ranger before we talk about our queen of all Pink Rangers. But, like, the Quantum Ranger, basically, so much for Magna Defender and the Titanium Ranger, but I just feel like Quantum Ranger was the more badass of the bunch. It had a much, tortured type life. And, he really basically had a major chip on his shoulder. He was, he had some serious beef with Wes. Excuse me. And, like, I really felt like this is exactly what I feel what the Tommy and Jason relationship, the Jason and Tommy stuff could have been back in Mighty Morphin, especially during the first season. And I feel like when you look back on Wes and Eric's differences, this is basically what the Jason and Tommy stuff from Mighty Morphin season 1 could have been. Although, because, again, back in the old days, the writing, back in the old days of early 90s Power Rangers with Mighty Morphin, the writing for Jason and Tommy, like what we had with Wes and Eric later, 9 seasons into the show later, wasn't even there yet. they were just, best friends. But then, of course, Tommy was brainwashed by Rita to be her evil Green Ranger. Jason wants to fight Tommy to break him from Rita's clutches. When the spell broke, then it became friends again. And then, joined the team and all of that. But Eric took a long time to join the Time Force Rangers, but he was just his own character, and he was with the Silver Guardians more. He didn't want to take crap with the core group. So he decided to be with the Silver Guardians because they were his sort of his own team of Rangers. But given the Silver Guardians had way more members than the Time Force Rangers ever have, but I also felt that Eric is what Tommy kind of would have been if Tommy's character was written in Power Rangers back in that time in 2001 rather than what we have right now, or even back when we even had this season. So, and then of course, his badass Q-Rex, even though I'll never forget back in Forever Red when they talked about all of their memories of what they've been doing, commemorating 10 years of the franchise, how Eric would wish to take his Q-Rex and then have him eat Tommy's Dragon Zord for lunch if Tommy still had his Green Ranger powers, but he doesn't, unfortunately. But we learn later in Super Ninja Steel with the Master Morpher thing, but I digress. But but I got a feel for Eric, and although I'm kind of glad they didn't kill him off like his counterpart in Time Ranger, because we know that in Time Ranger, Time Fire, Naoto does die. So, but even though it was a consideration that Koichi Sakamoto was thinking what could have been for Eric at the end of the season, but I think I'm glad that they kept Eric alive for future seasons to come. Mainly with the team ups with Wild Force, because we need to, not make the mistake what Sentai had been doing with a lot of these 6 Rangers that had dinosaur Zords and powers and stuff. So let's not do that. Now, as for our, again, Queen of all Pink Rangers, Jen Scotts herself. Now, Jen, she is our first, if not second, but if not first, female, major female leader of a Power Ranger team, behind Delphine of the Alien Rangers. But the thing with Jen, I wasn't fond of her character at first. Not because she was the leader. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with a female Ranger leading a Power Ranger team. I don't. And I know I sound like Sky Tate saying that, if you think back to SPD when in the first episode when Kruger told Sky, if Sid was to be appointed as Red Ranger, would you lead her into battle? And then I would dismiss it no, she's a girl. No, that would be sexist of me, so scratch it. But I actually thought the idea of making the Pink Ranger a leader of a Power Ranger team was interesting. In retrospect now. But back then, when I was a kid watching the season, I did got a bit, my dick was hurting. Why is the pink one the leader? I thought Red was always the leader. But, gotta realize, it doesn't matter. Male or female, anyone could be a leader of a Power Ranger team. It doesn't matter. And in fact, she was a great leader of a team. Because after all, her, Katie, Tripp, and Lucas were rookies, but Alex, and that's another thing that was so jarring with Jen's character. Well, I do like her as a Pink Ranger and how badass, tough, and nails she was. Because one of the other things I did like about Jen is she broke the traditional mold of being a traditional Pink Ranger. Every Pink Ranger, even ones way after her, like Sydney and Rose and Emma and Shelby and them, they were always, pretty girl Pink Rangers, pretty in pink basically. But having a tough as nails Pink Ranger like Jen, that's what made the show even more stronger. Is having our very strong, powerful Pink Ranger to not be completely the same stereotypical pretty hot girl all the time. So we have to make her, but she is attractive while also she can be both masculine and feminine at the same time. And that's what I liked about Jen's character. Although, again, as a kid, I didn't like it, but now as an adult, I do. There is a difference between 2001 young child me versus 2021 older adult, close to being 30 me. So that was probably why they made her the leader. Even when I watched the Sentai of Time Ranger, even Yuri, Time Pink was the leader of Time Ranger, the Time Rangers. So therefore, you had that going for her. Because she had a great, well fleshed out storyline for her. Yeah, it sucks that Katie didn't have a storyline, but at least Jen had a story, and she had a lot of great focus episodes. Jen's Revenge, Trust and Triumph, Time Force Traitor, even that stupid filler episode, Love Struck Rangers. But that's what I liked about her character. With some of the episodes, although Jen's Revenge, she still wanted revenge against Rancic for killing Alex. But then we learn, but once we get to the near end of the season, when Alex does come back in those 3 episodes, which I like to dub the Dawn of Destiny 3-parter, then her character had a shift and change, but she was still her tough as nails badass self. And it's like, now as for her and Alex, like, why was she even with Alex? Like, I get that her and Alex were together, but then when tragedy struck, when Rancic struck Alex in the back in the beginning of the season, she pretty much idolized Alex for being tough as nails, because she wanted to be just like him in a way. And that's pretty much where she was trying to be at, and that's where she was going with, and that's what she was trying to be at. But then she noticed how Alex had changed once, because they spent so much time in 2001, and he was watching the Rangers mess up the time and space continuum and stuff, and especially altering the course of their respective timeline, still being in the year 2001. And then when Alex starts getting aggressive and brash about it, it's the polar opposite of what Jen was somewhat in the beginning when she was toward Wes earlier. So when Alex comes back, but even though Alex is just basically Jason Font, but playing 2 different halves of the Red Ranger from 2 different time periods, but Alex, well, again, even I hated how Alex was playing time god with the Rangers. Like, he just really wanted to watch what the heck the Rangers are doing to the the timeline. Like, he really was watching them fuck everything up. But besides the point, there's a good reason that Jen broke up with Alex at the end, because she was in love with him. But as time went on, when her feelings shifted to Wes, and then when Alex comes back into the picture, and then when the Rangers were forced to come back to 2001 in the finale, then her feelings for him had changed completely. So basically, she knew damn well she had the right reason and the right choice to break up with his ass, because fuck you and fuck your time shadow support from earlier, and to think you were supposed to be dead, playing with her fucking emotions. Yeah, so there you go with that. And I just liked how she actually spent more of the season focusing on trying to capture Rancic, and her motivation for her and the team to get back into focus during that 3-parter with Dawn of Destiny and all of that, and fight against fate. And then you defeat the Destiny, and then you have to stick to the choice that you made. And I liked that. And even though after 40 episodes of the whole season, she finally, her and the team, captured Rancic. Even when she does come across him in the team up with the Wild Force Rangers, that being reinforcements from the future. Yeah, great fan favorite episode, by the way. She just needed to put her difference aside and realize that Rancic is not what he was from last time. And there you go with that. And at least she sustained her, error of her ways, and her being very motivated and very focused and strong-willed for a Pink Ranger. And I think that's all I can say about the characters. Now, in terms of episodes of Time Force that was best and worst, because, again, they had a lot of great episodes. I know the 2-part season premiere, Clash for Control 2-parter, the Movie Madness episodes, the 3 episodes about Destiny, which is the main overlying theme of the season, Destiny and choice. And then you also had the finale as well, and then even some filler episodes that were good aside from ones that were bad. Now, in terms of tonal episodes that were the best and worst, if there were some episodes that were the best tonally of Time Force, if there was one episode series-wise that I liked, would have to be the finale, End of Time, because basically End of Time was a huge tearjerker of a Power Ranger finale for me, because personally, this is part of my childhood nostalgia again, and trauma. After Power Rangers Time Force ended, I think I've told this story before in the fandom. I don't think a lot did and heard of me, but Time Force was the last Power Ranger series that my mom saw. Because, me and my brother and my parents, we all watched Power Rangers. My parents, and I told you the story how my parents were in the Power Rangers. And basically my mom liked Time Force, even though it was her last season she ever watched until she sadly passed away when me and my brother were still kids. And when the season ended and we were about to do once Wild Force was coming and the year 2002 was fast approaching, less than 6 months, basically I knew then and there that I think that's why I had to open up on how I was against the season from before. And then when the season ended, and then my mom's death, and then when we had Wild Force Onward, and then as time went on, I looked back on Time Force and realizing that it was a great Power Ranger series, and I can see why it was so special to me and my parents who watched the show. And also Time Force, it was a special season to her, because I think there was a reason I did watch Time Force, because my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when Lost Galaxy came back from its summer hiatus in '99. So during the years of Lightspeed Rescue and Time Force, and when I was a kid still watching Power Rangers, but again, when I talk about next time, she got to watch those seasons of Power Rangers, although Time Force most especially, because Lightspeed Rescue was just there in the background like Lost Galaxy was to my parents, so because we moved and all. And Time Force, I felt there was a reason I have to have more respect for the season now than I did 20 years ago. And yes, Time Force is still a great Power Ranger series. I mean, it is just as good now as it was back then. But I just feel like I really underestimated the season for 2 decades. And while I still have feelings for Lost Galaxy and In Space, but I feel like Time Force 20 years later won me over. And so did even seasons not it, like Wild Force. Well, I still like Wild Force, and I'll talk about Wild Force a little bit next year for its 20th anniversary. And even with Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder, heck, I mean, every season of Power Rangers, and yes, even including Samurai and Megaforce, all surpassed Lost Galaxy. And again, when I'll discuss those feelings next time in the next episode of the podcast. But it's just like, I just kind of wish that if she was still alive to see the other seasons, but I can see why this was it for her. And I know I was not going to have my mom for long, so. Anyway, beside the point of my personal life upbringing with this, with the season, and with, my history with the Ranger fan, the Rangers, and, okay, so past the season, we had, the team-ups with Wild Force, the first being Reinforcements from the Future, which was a really great episode for the Time Force and Wild Force cast. And although I liked how they fully redeemed Rancic and Nadira in that team-up, and even I liked it how Jen returned with her top secret special assignment gear for Time Force, and that black leather and all, and the dreadlocks, and then also the differences between Eric and Taylor in that team up. I liked the Mute Orgs, although they were mishmashes of monsters we had from past seasons, especially noticing one of the mute orgs had Deviot's mutant form for half of the body and the head. And then you also had, and the chemistry between the two teams. Then Forever Red, of course, Wes and Eric would return for Forever Red, the 10th anniversary Red Ranger team up. And then many years later, we would have Legendary Battle and Power Ranger Super Mega Force, but Wes got lopsided and wasted in that, so skip that, because even though I minded Wes being the only Time Force Ranger coming back in Legendary Battle for a cameo, but you know how I felt about Super Mega Force not giving, having the opportunity to have a tribute to Time Force, because after all, there was an episode opportunity they had at the time, but they squandered it. Wes would come back again in Power Ranger Super Ninja Steel for yet another anniversary team up. So therefore, Wes is another Ranger outside of, next to Tommy and TJ that keep coming back for anniversary episodes because they were such fan favorites. And Wes being a fan favorite Red Ranger as well. So for him to come back for yet another anniversary team up after Forever Red and Legendary Battle, Dimensions in Danger, he actually had some more to do in that episode with him teaming up with Coda and Gemma in Legendary Battle. So outside of the series, we also had this graphic novel story of Time Force, from Boom Studios, which is Sins of the Future, which is a sequel comic to the season. But I'm not going to give any spoilers. I haven't read the comic yet, and I know I haven't been doing the Boom Studio comics of Power Rangers, guys, so forgive me. And I will talk about Hyperforce next time because I heard that's part of Time Force, but I'll discuss Hyperforce next time with that. So in general, though, I was really, I know I got sidetracked and I'm all over the place with my rant for the podcast, but if there was one episode of Time Force that I do find the worst of the show, if there's one episode of Time Force I do find the worst of the show, it would probably be Legend of the Clock Tower. I just don't understand why they even did an episode dedicated to the Clock Tower and the legend behind it. Because, it's an episode with Katie, and she goes into time with this character, Walter Brown, and him being a coward, him being bullied, and it was about standing up for yourself, but it was so cheesy and poorly acted and poorly written. And I personally just didn't like that episode. And, of all episodes of the original Saban era Power Rangers, I made the Spies, but Legend of the Clock Tower, that was such a dull and bad episode for me because I just personally felt the episode was just a snore fest of an episode, and I don't know why they even produced it. I get they had to save money for the more better stuff for the show, but did they really have to do an episode dedicated to Katie going back many, many years into the past before any of the Rangers and any of Time Force even existed and was born, and in the 17th century or whatever, to do an episode dedicated to that? Yeah, so that episode sucked. One of my favorite whacked out episodes, though, will always still be Movie Madness because, Movie Madness is still one of my favorite comic relief episodes and one of my all-time comic relief Power Rangers episodes because it's just harmless fun, man. It's just them making fun of certain Hollywood people at the time, like Jackie Chan and, with the filmmaker and before going into Cinecon, looking like filmmakers like the Wes Craven and George A. Romero, or a combination between George A. Romero and Wes Craven with Steven Spielberg in there. And then you also had some of the movie parodies and them going into movie dimensions, like the cowboy movie, the kung fu movie. Although Katie's musical movie dimension sucked portion. Eric and his George of the Jungle Tarzan-esque movie dimension. So that was so fun and hilarious. And I can see why it's such a funny, fun and enduring harmless fun of a romp of a 2-part episode. Despite the series' popularity, Time Force was intended to have an additional 10 episodes, kind of like Mighty Morphin Season 1 did with the additional 20 after the initial 40 episodes were done. And they were rumored to also, yet again, like a couple seasons of Rangers, was supposed to have a movie, But we don't know whether if that that canceled Power Rangers Time Force movie were to take place in the show continuity like Turbo did, or it would be an alternate continuity film, much like the original Mighty Morphin movie was. Unfortunately, the reason why the movie was kind of canceled because there was some stuff with the Screen Actors Guild and stuff, and then the writers, some sort of a Writers Guild thing going on, problem, and then also due to the fact that the last time we had a Power Rangers movie that bombed for Saban at the time was only the Turbo movie. So there was a reason Saban didn't want to risk doing another Power Rangers film and then have that be a flop at the box office. So I think it made sense for Time Force to not have a movie. So instead, they got the movie Madness 2-parter. So it made sense. So I think in final thoughts, I don't want to go on for long because I'm afraid that according to this recording process, it'll get corrupted. But I do say that Time Force is worth watching, and although also I have to bring up about the 9/11 controversies, which I've talked about before, but if, again, we'll never see those pre-9/11 edits of those episodes again. We're just going to be stuck with the episodes that we, edits of the episodes we got post 9/11, because it's going to be impossible getting those pre-9/11 cuts to certain episodes like Clash for Control and The Time Shadow and Rancic Lives ever again. So there you go, guys. So that's my retrospective a bit on Power Rangers Time Force, and it's still a great season. It still holds up. Give it a watch anytime you feel like, because it's still one of the best seasons to date, up there with In Space, Lost Galaxy, RPM, and yes, Mighty Morphin, and Dino Charge, and all those seasons, Beast Morphers, because we'll never have a season like Power Rangers like this ever again in a lifetime. The closest we did was like with SPD, but well, SPD, we'll discuss that another day. So anyway, guys, that's it. So what are your favorite episodes, your favorite characters, favorite anything for Power Rangers Time Force? Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'm off for now. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys next video talking about what my life would have been if I had stopped watching Power Rangers by a certain point.